السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا، من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء، واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم، ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، فإن أصدق الكلام كلام الله، وأحسن الحديث حديث محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. وبعد. Since brothers and sisters, and of course we apologize for our late beginning, Allah reward all of you who have waited patiently for us to begin. Ikhwan, jazakumullah khair. As you're acquainted and aware, the topic that we will discuss for our sitting today is a topic around the affair of Easter. And since Easter is nearly upon us, it is apt that we look into something related to Easter, its origins, and how we may as Muslims reflect upon any benefits that we may take from our conclusions. But verily, as far as the celebrations of the non-Muslim, that which is known as the Nayruz, then we have a number of texts around resembling and falling into resembling the non-Muslim. Indeed, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he has mentioned, "Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum." Whosoever resembles a people, then he is from them. And this affair of al-mushabaha, or resembling a people, is one, brothers and sisters, that revolves around the Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah. He mentions in his very important work around resembling the kuffar and resembling the non-Muslim, and the various rulings that are related to that. His book Kitab al-Iqtida Sirat al-Mustaqim, he mentions the fact that the affair of resembling the kuffar and the discussion around resembling the kuffar revolves around those things that are specific to the kuffar. And in particular, he has particular focus upon the festivities and the various forms of celebration that they have. And so he discusses the hadith, "Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum," whosoever resembles a people, then he is from them. He declares that the one who does so, then he falls into a major sin, even though the wording of the hadith would indicate that the one who does so is a kafir. That is, as far as the wording of the hadith, it would indicate and appear to indicate that the one who resembles the non-Muslim, then he is a non-Muslim and he's exited Islam, though the ruling of kufr is not passed upon that individual immediately, but it is no doubt an affair that will cause a person to enter a realm of grave danger, particularly for his iman and for his Islam. And so one of the first things that we'll discuss and mention as it relates to the affair is the dangers of resembling the kuffar in terms of this topic being one of the forms of celebration that they have. And since it was one of the greatest areas that they would discuss, that is the earlier scholars, when they would speak about the affair of resembling the kuffar, one of the greatest areas that they would enter into is resembling them as it relates to their festivities and their celebrations and the various forms of Eid that they may have. The term Eid naturally referring to a time of celebration for a people, a time of festivity. And so the reason, no doubt, it becomes an issue, particularly for us living here in England, is because when these festivities come upon us, for those of our brothers and sisters who have children who are in non-Muslim schools, oftentimes the children are compelled to be involved in some of the issues related to their festivities, and they themselves may, being that they have grown as young children in our society here, they themselves may be inclined towards wanting to involve themselves in such celebrations. Not naturally because of the fact that children love enjoying themselves, they love parties, they love celebrations, they love anything that will give them or will be a cause of celebration. So one of the things that we as adults and as young ones should be extremely careful of is falling into this affair of joining them in their celebration. And that is something as adults is easy, but as young ones, in the absence of their parents, in the absence of those who are guardians over them, they may fall prey to being involved, ikhwan, and getting involved in these celebrations. And so it is imperative that we nurture our young ones upon understanding that those celebrations are not our celebrations and we don't involve ourselves in them. And there isn't an issue in that. There isn't an issue with not involving oneself in the celebration of the land that one lives in. For indeed, from the people of this land, from the natives of this land, are those who don't involve themselves and don't celebrate Christmas, and don't celebrate Easter. And they were born and bred within or citizens of England, and not necessarily Muslims or following a religion that is manifest outside of Great Britain, but individuals born and bred here and have ancestry here and don't celebrate Easter and don't celebrate Christmas. And so it isn't imperative that every individual gets involved in the celebration, and neither is it law that we join in with their festivities. And so since it is no doubt a religious affair for us, it is important that we first and foremost understand that the issue is one that revolves around an issue of, or that revolves between major sin and kufr. Of course, if one involves himself in it and knows that he shouldn't be doing it but does it anyway, it is considered a major sin. But if he does it believing that it is halal for him, then of course he falls into kufr when he does so. If he believes that it is halal, or it is the same as our celebration, the same as our Eid, for example, then he falls into what is considered kufr. The Messenger ﷺ, when he came to Medina, he saw that the people of Medina, after they made the migration from Mecca to Medina, that the people of Medina were celebrating a particular day, a festivity that they had, and he asked and queried concerning what this festivity was, and it was explained to him. And so the Messenger ﷺ, he said, Inna Allah qad abdalakum bihima ma huwa khayrun minhuma. He said, verily Allah has exchanged for you these 2 days of celebration that they have with 2 days of celebration that are better than it. That is Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. So Allah Azza wa Jal has exchanged and given the Muslim the best days of celebration that they could possibly desire, and that is Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr. Eid al-Adha, Eid al-Fitr, both of them, ikhwan, being celebrations that fall at the end and seal two of the greatest forms of worship within the deen. Eid al-Fitr falls at the end of the pillar of Islam, Siyam. And the fasting of Ramadan is sealed with a celebration. And Allah Azza wa Jal mentions, as it relates to the affair of Ramadan, شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصم ومن كان مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر ولتكملوا العدة ولتكبروا الله على ما هداكم. that Allah mentions the month of Ramadan in which the Quran was revealed as a guidance for the people, a clarification of the guidance, and a criterion between truth and falsehood. So whomsoever witnesses the month, then let him fast. And whosoever is, as Allah Azza wa Jal continues, whoever is sick or upon a journey, then let him fast a number of other days. Then Allah mentions, Allah wants ease for you, and He does not want hardship for you. So Ramadan and its fasting is a period of ease, purification, and upliftment for the Muslim when he completes the days. And Allah Azza wa Jal mentions, وَلِتُكْمِلُوا الْعِدَّةِ, and He wants for you to complete the days. وَلِتُكَبِّرُوا اللَّهَ عَلَى مَا هَدَاكُمْ, and that you make the takbir of Allah on the basis of that which Allah has guided you to. And the affair of making the takbir of Allah revolves around the takbirat, as the scholars have mentioned, the takbirat of Eid. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, walillahi alhamd. And so Allah Azza wa Jal makes mention of one of the affairs related to Eid itself and the Eid celebration, and that is the takbir of Allah Azza wa Jal. So even though it is a celebration, and the best of celebrations, it is a celebration that is tied to one of the greatest forms of ibadah that the Muslim performs, and that is Siyam. Eid al-Adha, again, tied and connected to one of the greatest forms of worship, and that is Hajj. At the end of Hajj, on the day that everyone who is performing Hajj, they perform the various acts of worship on a day that is known as Yawm al-Nahar, or the day that has in it the greatest pillars and wajibat during Hajj, the stoning of the jamarat, the slaughtering of the animal, making tawaf around the Kaaba, making the sa'i between Safa and Marwa. All of those things occur on a day known as Yawm al-Nahar for the one who is on Hajj. But for everyone outside of Hajj, that day is a day of Eid. And that day is a day of celebration, and a day when one slaughters, and anyone who is poor, he receives from the slaughtering, he receives from the food, and that he is not left out of the celebration on the basis of his poverty. And so those two celebrations that Allah Azza wa Jal has blessed us with are two celebrations that are related to the end of two of the greatest acts of worship that all of the prophets and the messengers performed, and that is the Siyam, fasting, and Al-Hajj. And it is established that the prophets and the messengers perform Hajj. The Messenger mentioned concerning Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, that it is as though I am looking at Musa upon a red camel with two garments of ihram upon him. And so Musa alayhi salatu wasalam used to perform Hajj. So in any case, ikhwan, our celebrations, alhamdulillah, are celebrations that are tied to the affair of Tawheed and fulfilling Tawheed, and that which is related to celebrating the guidance and the blessings of Allah Azza wa Jal upon us. And of course, ikhwan, that affair is, though it is a form of celebration, it is likewise a form of giving thanks. And Allah Azza wa Jal increases the believer in the blessings that He has given him if he gives thanks for those blessings. وَإِذْ تَأَذَّرَ رَبُّكُمْ لَإِنْ شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. And when your Lord proclaimed that verily if you give thanks, then I will increase you. And so our celebrations, alhamdulillah, are blessed celebrations, ikhwan, that we should be proud of. As far as the celebrations of the kuffar then, and the celebration, particularly this one that we're going to discuss today, then as we're going to see, ikhwan, they are celebrations in essence that have their basis in nothing other than paganism. And it isn't in any way, and they are not in any way celebrations that were taken from Isa ibn Maryam, or from Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, or any of the prophets and messengers that we believe in that are present within the Bible. In fact, brothers and sisters, you'll see that the celebration, whether it be the celebration of Christmas, whether it be New Year's celebrations, or whether it be the celebration of Easter, they have their basis, ikhwan, in paganism. As far as the term Easter is concerned, and the origins of Easter, if we look at the term Easter and it occurring in the Bible, then you will see that Easter in actuality, yani this title and this name and this term, it does not occur in the Bible except in one passage. And the one passage that it occurs in the Bible is in actuality, as has been agreed upon by Bible scholars, is a mistranslation of a word, a Hebrew word, Pasha, which is a reference to the Passover. And so the term that is present within the Bible that has been translated as Easter is in actuality a mistranslation of a word, Pasha, which is a reference to the Passover. And that then is an affair, Ikhwan, that would indicate first and foremost that in terms of the term itself, then it does not refer in any way, shape or form to Easter as we know it and its manifestation now. In fact, Afwan, my mistake, not the Hebrew translation, but translation of the Greek word Pasha. And that is because, of course, the Bible, whether you're looking at the Old Testament or the New Testament, none of the scriptures of the Bible are original manuscripts and original scriptures from the period of those prophets and those messengers. The only thing that Christians have is and are Greek translations of those books. So the only thing that is present are Greek translations of those books and not the original manuscripts of those books. As far as the Quran is concerned, and of course, Ikhwan, we have Masahif and we have the manuscripts that were present at the time of the Sahaba and the companions, and those manuscripts that were written and penned down by companions. But as far as the affair of the other manuscripts and the other books, then we do not have anything other than latter-day translations from Greek into English. And so we have a translation of a translation. And so the earliest scriptures that are present are only translations, not original scriptures. And that is an important point for us to note. So as far as the passage is concerned, then the passage makes mention of the fact that some soldiers, they had apprehended Peter, the apostle Peter, who was one of the disciples, or is mentioned as one of the disciples of Jesus, of Isa, and when he was apprehended, he was put in prison, and he was delivered by 4 quaternions of soldiers, and it was 16 soldiers to guard him, and they intended that after Easter, that they would bring him forth to the people. That is, after the Passover. And the Passover was a celebration, a Jewish celebration, which is and does have origin, and it referred to the period that Allah Azza wa Jal saved Bani Israel from one of the punishments that he placed upon the people of Fir'aun and the people of Egypt. From the 9 punishments that Allah Azza wa Jal sent upon them, one of them was that the firstborn sons of the people of Egypt would be killed, other than Bani Israel. If Fir'aun did not release Bani Israel and give his people, free his people, and the people of Musa, then Allah Azza wa Jal sent Musa with one of the punishments and that would come upon them if they did not free Bani Israel, and that was that their newborn sons would be killed. And so Bani Israel, in order to save and to stop the angel of death from entering their homes and from taking their firstborn sons, they were commanded to slaughter animals, slaughter sheep, and then to smear blood around the doors of their houses. And that when they were to smear that blood around the doors of their houses, the angel of death would pass over their homes, and they would not have their sons and their children killed. And so they celebrated that affair of the Passover with a celebration that was a well-known Jewish celebration and a Jewish festivity. that was what the passage in the Bible that mentions Easter, that was what it was a translation of, a reference to the Passover. And so there are a few things then that we should first and foremost look at. That we have a well-known established celebration and holiday, the origin of which is not present within the Bible. It is a well-known established Christian celebration, Christian holiday, Christian festivity, the origin of which is not present in the Bible. So the question that must rise then is, where is the affair documented? Where has it come from? It is not present in any of the books of the Bible that speak of the life of Isa, the life of Jesus. Not that we affirm them to be authentic, but in any case, as far as their sources are concerned, then we do not find the mention of Easter in any of those books. Neither is it in the books that were written in the relate to the early church. Some of the books of the Bible are books that were not books related to the period of Isa, but they were in actuality books that spoke of the early church, the first 100 years after the ascent of Isa ibn Maryam, the first 100 years of Christians and followers of Isa, or possibly a period slightly shorter. There were books in the Bible that discussed that period, the books of Acts, the books of the epistles, that they were books that discussed the early church. And so it was not a reference to the period of Isa, but a reference to the early followers of Isa. Nowhere in any of those books did we have a discussion of the celebration of Easter. Not at the time of Jesus, neither at the time of the early or during the period of the early church, at least for at least the books that discuss the first 50 to 60 years or so after the ascent of Isa ibn Maryam. And so, where then did the affair come from? The reality of the affair, Ikhwan, is that the celebration of Easter is in many ways resemblant to the celebration of Christmas. Christmas was a festivity and a period that was celebrated originally not by Isa ibn Maryam, not by any of his disciples, but it was a pagan festivity that used to take place at a time during the end of the year, during the period of December. And it began from sort of mid-December, and it was a period of festivity known as solstice, or also known as Saturnalia. And it was a celebration of what the pagans used to hold, the birth of the new sun, because they held that during that period, the days of the year, after being short because of the winter, they began from the end of December to change in length and become longer. And so they held that since it was the period that the days began to become slightly longer, then it is and it must be the birth of the new sun. And since they were a people who used to worship the sun, they saw then that was a perfect time for them to have a festivity celebrating the longer days, which they saw was the birth of the new sun every year. And it was a period and a festivity that was filled with vice and evil and debauchery and alcoholism. And they would have, to the extent, Ikhwan, there was another festivity that was at the same time known as Juvenalia, which was a pagan celebration celebrating youth. And so they would incorporate Saturnalia with Juvenalia, and they would have relations with juveniles. The juveniles' children would drink alcohol and they would get drunk, and adults would have relations with the children. And it was a period, similarly, that for a set period, the Romans, because they allowed them to have their celebration, they held that during that festivity, no one would be prosecuted in any court of law. So it was a period where it was a free for all, anything goes. You could take life even. And what they would do was that they would have an individual that was that they would consider one of the enemies of the state, or someone who had transgressed against Rome, and they would tie him up in the city, in the middle of the city, and they would torture him throughout the whole period of Saturnalia and Juvenalia, and then ultimately kill him. So it was a period, an evil period that they would celebrate, but it was one that they would not let go. It was a festivity that they would not let go of, and so the Romans, they saw, the Christian Romans, they saw that if we desire for the pagans to enter Christianity, then there is no way that they will enter if they believe they have to give up Saturnalia and Juvenalia. And so, rather than telling them that they have to leave it alone, let us incorporate it into Christianity and into their celebration and their worship of Jesus. And let them, instead of celebrating the birth of the new son, let them celebrate the birth of Isa ibn Maryam, of the Son of God, they say. And so it was a period then that they incorporated from that pagan festivity. Instead of worshipping and celebrating the birth of the new son that they used to worship, now since they worship Jesus, let us celebrate the birth of Isa ibn Maryam. Biblically, the scriptures indicate that Christmas could not have fell at the birth of Isa could not have been at the time of Christmas, because the scriptures indicate that it was during harvest time that Isa was born, which would have been earlier in the year, closer to autumn, end of summer. And so even scripturally, they do not have any evidence for the fact that Jesus or Isa was born at that time. That is, of course, within their own books. We're only returning and looking at that which they use as evidence. And so the affair then is one that returned back to them, incorporating paganism into Christianity in order to make it fair seeming to the pagans that we can become Christians and we can still celebrate Saturnalia. And thus you have the presence of mistletoe, which was in actuality something that they used to use when they would carry out their debauchery, and they would use mistletoe because, as you know, it has that white, form, and it resembles, or they used to use it because it resembled the issue of men. Similarly, they would practice, or many of the practices, the giving of gifts, the building or the erecting of trees. In the Bible itself, we have the chastisement of those who chop down trees and decorate them, the pagans who used to do so in the Bible. But yet still this is incorporated into their practice. And so Easter, in many ways, is much the same. I believe we discussed the affair of the origins of Christmas in a separate lecture, and we discussed the origin of Santa Claus and what have you. But Easter, in many ways, is much the same. That they saw that this was another celebration that the pagans had, another period of celebration that the pagans had, and that they were not going to let go, so let us incorporate it into Christianity. What was that celebration? It was a celebration that they had, or that some of the pagans who used to worship a Mesopotamian, Chaldean goddess known as Ishtar. There was a Mesopotamian goddess, Mesopotamia, which was the area of Persia, modern-day Iraq, that they would worship a god that they saw to be the god, or they used to refer to her as the Queen of Heaven. She was also considered the god of fertility. And so they would celebrate during the period of Easter, they would celebrate celebrate their worship of the god Ishtar, and the god, her name in one of the European languages was Ashtart, or as occurs in some of their writings, that her name was Ishtar. And so the affair then returns back to the celebration again of a pagan god, and that is something that they bear witness to themselves in their own scriptures. And so, as far as the affair is concerned, we have one of the Bible dictionaries, a very popular and referenced Bible dictionary known as Vine's Complete Expository Bible Dictionary of the Old and New Testament words. It mentions, as it relates to the discussion of Easter, it mentions, and I quote, "The term Easter is not of Christian origin. It is another form of Astarte, one of the titles of the Chaldean goddess, the Queen of Heaven. The festival of Pasch, which was the Passover, which was held by Christians in post-apostolic times, was a continuation of the Jewish festival." And then it continues, "From this Pasch, the pagan festival of Easter was quite distinct and was introduced into the apostate Western religion as part of the attempt to adopt pagan festivities to Christianity." And that then was a quote from one of their sources, accepting and acknowledging the fact that they were celebrating the Chaldean Babylonian goddess known as Ishtar. And there's even a Bible quote, a Bible reference that refers to this practice of theirs in the book of Jeremiah 7:18. Mentions that the children gather wood, which is one of the things that they used to do at that time. They gather wood, and the father gathers the fire, and the women knead their bread or knead their dough to make cakes to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto other gods, that they may provoke me to anger. And so, biblically, even in their own book, it mentions that here this passage condones and dispraises their actions and declares it something that angered God, and that their festivities, making bread, making cakes, and celebrating the Queen of Heaven, is something that causes was the anger of God. Biblically, it's present, yet still it is something that was incorporated into their religion. And so the origin then of the festivity was the affair then of the celebration of this God. The Catholic Encyclopedia, it defines Easter with the following statement: Easter, the English term, according to the 18th century monk Bede, relates to Ishtar, a Teutonic goddess of the rising light of day and spring, which deity, however, is otherwise unknown. And so it was a reference, and this Ishtar was the European reference for the same god, Ishtar or Astarte, the goddess of fertility, and the goddess who was celebrated during that time in spring. And so, since that was the case, then we see that there are parts and aspects and elements of Easter that were incorporated from that and that were brought on board because of that. For example, we have the Easter egg. The Easter egg in its origin, let any Christian inform us of the origins of the Easter egg in the Bible. If Easter itself was not mentioned other than in one place erroneously, then the Easter egg, Ikhwan, I'm sure you will agree, the likelihood of it occurring in the Bible is even greater or even less apparent. We have here then that the Easter egg, its introduction into the affair and into the celebration of Easter was on the basis of the fact that the egg, since it is for many animals the beginnings of life, and even for human beings, it is considered the beginnings of life. And so they utilized that, since it was and the festival was a festival celebrating the goddess of fertility. They utilized the egg because of its significance. And they would decorate eggs. Initially, they weren't the Cadbury's chocolate egg that we find now for sale in shops. Rather, they used to decorate and paint eggs, and they were a part of the celebration that people, the pagans, they used to decorate these eggs, celebrating the return of spring. Likewise, we have the affair of the Easter rabbit, or the Easter bunny. The origin of the Easter bunny similarly returns back to the fact that it is considered an emblem of fertility. It is considered an emblem of fertility, and thus it was utilized for that same reason. In the same encyclopedia, we have the reference under Easter eggs. It mentions that the custom of Easter eggs may have its origin in paganism. For a great many pagan customs celebrating the return of spring gravitated to Easter. Likewise, under the heading Easter rabbit, it states, the rabbit is a pagan symbol and has always been an emblem of fertility, which indicates again that they acknowledge the fact that the Easter egg and the Easter bunny, that they were incorporated into a celebration that has its origin in paganism, incorporated because they were signs and symbols of fertility, that festivity and that period being the celebration of those or that period of the worship of this god of this goddess of fertility, Ishtar. And much like Santa Claus, and I don't know if you remember, when we discussed the affair of Christmas, we said that the origins of Santa Claus was that Santa Claus was actually St. Nicholas, one who was incorporated into the worship and to celebration of Christmas quite late. And St. Nicholas was a harsh, well-known, harsh, dark character that used to punish children, used to beat children, beat kids, and his bubbly red cloak and his red outfit was incorporated into Christmas by Coca-Cola. And that Coca-Cola, after they removed cocaine from Coca-Cola, their sales dipped dramatically because it was what gave Coke its kick initially. And so when they removed cocaine and replaced it with caffeine, it didn't have, people weren't interested in Coke any longer. And so they needed a campaign, Coca-Cola needed a campaign to bring the sales of Coca-Cola back up. And so during Christmas, they depicted St. Nicholas in a red garment after having drank a tin or a bottle of Coke. He, instead of being this dark, morbid, bent over, dark, bearded character, he now became this cuddly, red, bright, red-faced Santa Claus that we know, instead of beating children, now giving them gifts and being a nice St. Nicholas. And that is why we have in the popular Christmas carol, you better not cry, you better not, I'm telling you why, because Santa Claus is coming to town. And when Santa Claus comes, you know how he deals with children. And so the origin of Santa Claus was that he was not a nice individual at all, and he was well known for being very evil and harsh with children and beating children. Similarly, the Easter Bunny, because of his relation to the affair of fertility, he was likewise depicted and has been depicted as one who took on an almost human form, and during the season gave the children gifts in order to celebrate the festivity. Encyclopedia Britannica mentions there is no indication of the observance of the Easter festival in the New Testament or in the writings of the Apostolic Fathers, and that is the early church, neither in the Old Testament, the New Testament, nor in the Old Testament, or in the writings of the early fathers of the church, as they are referred to, those who wrote about the early church after Jesus, after Isa. Nowhere, as the Encyclopedia Britannica mentions, nowhere is it mentioned that they used to celebrate Easter in any way. It continues, the Gentile Christians, on the other hand, unfettered by Jewish traditions, because the followers of Isa ibn Maryam were actually Jews. And that is something that many Christians don't realize, that Jesus was not sent to all nations and was not sent to all individuals, as the Messenger Muhammad was. That verily he was sent to all of mankind and the jinn. And Allah Azza wa Jal mentions that verily we have sent you rahmatan lil alameen, as a mercy for all of the worlds, alayhi salatu wassalam. While Isa was not sent except to Bani Israel. He was not sent except to the Jews. And that is something that we have in Quranically and biblically. In the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal mentions when Isa addressed his people, he said, وَرَسُولًا إِلَى بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلِ أَنِّي قَدْ جِئْتُكُمْ بِآيَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ. That I am a Rasul and a messenger to Bani Israel. And verily I have come with signs from your Lord. In the Bible, it mentions, think not that I have come except to the lost sheep of the children of Israel. Think that I have not come except to the lost sheep of the children of Israel. That is, I have only come for them, for the lost sheep of the children of Israel. And those who have gone astray, left the path from among the children of Israel, then it is those individuals that I have been sent to. But the incorporation of Easter into Christianity occurred, or what was one of the things that was made a statute by the Emperor Constantine in the year 325. There's a very important year within Christian history, and that is the year 325 AD, because due to the fighting and the warring that was taking place in the church, the Roman Emperor, who wasn't necessarily a religious man himself, but was concerned about the church and the station that the church had within the state, the Roman Emperor Constantine decided, in order to stop the fighting, that we are going to have a council. That is, we're going to bring together all of the high priests, all of the people of knowledge and learning, and we're going to have a council in a place known as Nicaea. And that occurred in 325, and it was during that council that many books were removed from the Bible, because they saw that it was the presence of those books that caused the fighting, and the presence of those scriptures that caused the problems. And of course, inevitably, the verses and the books concerning, or the coming of Isa, of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, naturally those books would have more than likely been removed during that time and later. In any case, during the Council of Nicaea, we had the incorporation of Easter into Christian religion. Encyclopedia Britannica, it mentions a final settlement of the dispute over whether and when to keep Easter or Passover, because they were the early church, because they were Jews, and because the followers of Isa were Jews, they were still celebrating the Passover because it was a Jewish celebration. And so Constantine, with the new influx of ex-pagan Christians, and with the Easter pagan festivity falling at the same time as the Passover, the Jewish Passover, and with now the numbers of the followers of Isa from paganism being greater and increasing over the followers of Isa who were actually Jewish, Constantine decided to keep the celebration of Easter. So he mentions, the Encyclopedia Britannica explains, a further settlement of the dispute over whether and when to keep Easter or Passover was one among the other reasons which led the Roman Emperor Constantine to summon the Council of Nicaea in 325. The decision of the council was unanimous that Easter was to be kept on Sunday, and on the same Sunday throughout the world, and that no one should hereafter follow the blindness of the Jews. Because as far as they were concerned, the Jews were blind, following some old religion and some old way that they were upon. And so we're no longer going to follow the blindness. I'm going to be blind like the Jews. Now we are going to incorporate this fresh festivity, and that is the celebration of Easter. And particularly since he needed the presence of those ex-pagans, and since they were greater in number than the Jews, his decision was to keep Easter over and above the celebration of the Passover, and so it was incorporated officially into the church during that time, and that was in 325 after the ascent of Isa ibn Maryam. We see then that the incorporation of this pagan festivity was just to appease ex-pagans and to appease pagans who may be considering converting to Christianity. That we can still practice and we can still have our festivities. We still have Christmas, we still have Easter. These are all our festivities and our celebrations. So why not? Why not become Christian? And we'll be treated well by the state. There are things that are afforded to us if we're Christians, and so why not become Christian? And so that was one of the methods that was utilized in order to keep individuals and to keep people present in the Christian religion, and likewise to bring those who were not yet Christian, to entice them into becoming Christian. Another issue, and these are one or two issues that we'll mention before we round up. There are some issues related to some of the days around Easter itself. But there were some days that were, because it was during the period of the Passover, that biblically it was straight after the Passover that Isa ibn Maryam, they say, was taken to be crucified. And so it is in terms of the Easter celebration and in terms of that which happened and that which took place with Isa, both of them fell at a good time. Since it was after the Passover, and the Passover was close in proximity and in time to the period and the celebration of Easter, it was an easy celebration, an easy festivity to incorporate. Fell at the same time, and there were some days that we can now rename. From those days, we have what is known as Maundy Thursday. Maundy Thursday was actually the day that they say that the disciples had the Last Supper with Isa ibn Maryam. Because as the narration in the Bible goes, the messenger Isa ibn Maryam, he had with his companions, he had a last meal. And it was a Passover meal that was followed the following day by him being seized by the Romans and taken to be crucified. Then, that was on the Friday, he was crucified. Then, after the Saturday, you had the Friday, then the Saturday, then the Sunday, he rose again from the dead, they say. And so, those days are days of significance. The Thursday they refer to as Maundy Thursday, which was the day that Isa was, or that he and his disciples had the Last Supper. The following day they referred to as Good Friday. And Good Friday, one may argue, well, why would it be referred to as good if it was the day that Isa was killed? Jesus was killed on that day. Why would you refer to it as good? And so their argument is that the Son of God was killed on that day, but that was the beginning of our salvation. That was the day that began and saw the beginning of the means of salvation, because it is by the blood of Jesus Christ that we're redeemed, and that we are able to repent, and that we're able to be purified. And so even though it was a bad day in that he was killed, it is a good day because it saw the beginnings of our salvation. And so that is referred to as Good Friday. Then the Sunday that follows is Easter Sunday itself. And that was the day that they say that Isa ibn Maryam was found alive and that had raised from the dead. And they argue that the Bible itself indicates that he was to die. And as is, of course, Muslim belief, that Isa ibn Maryam was not killed. Allah Azza wa Jal mentions in the Quran, وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ. He was not killed, neither was he crucified, but a resemblance was made of him. Al-Imam Ibn Kathir, in the tafsir of Ibn Kathir, in his explanation of the verse, he mentioned a number of narrations that some of the earlier companions, they mentioned concerning what actually occurred. And there are a few narrations that indicate that when the Romans came to seize Isa on the basis of the fact that the Jews were pushing them to take him because he was a false prophet, they claimed. And since he was a false prophet claiming to be the Messiah that they were waiting for, but as far as they were concerned he was not, then they decided that he should be seized and he should be killed on the basis of him committing these transgressions against Allah and against God. And so it was the Jews who pushed the Romans and the Roman authorities to seize Isa and to crucify him because of these transgressions against God that he is doing, claiming to be a prophet. And so when they sent the Romans to seize Isa, that the narration that occurs in Tafsir of Ibn Kathir was that Allah Azza wa Jal, prior to them coming, Allah informed Isa that they were coming to seize him. And so Isa ibn Maryam said to his disciples, who will take my resemblance, and for him is Jannah. And so no one responded other than one young disciple. And so Isa saw him to be too young. And so he repeated, who will take my resemblance, and for him is Jannah. And no one responded again except for the same boy. And so Isa repeated, who will take my resemblance, and for him is Jannah. No one responded again except for the same boy. And so immediately Allah Azza wa Jal made Isa resemble the boy, and the boy resemble Isa. And it was the boy that was taken in the form of Isa and not Isa ibn Maryam. Another narration mentions that when that occurred, not even the disciples knew that Isa had changed, or that Allah had exchanged the boy for Isa and the form of the boy for Isa. There is a third narration that mentions that when Isa made that statement to his disciples, that the Romans entered upon them, and Allah Azza wa Jal made all of the disciples resemble Isa. And so when they entered, they were not able to detect and to define which one was Isa really. And so they made a proclamation that either the true Isa come out to us, or we will kill all of you. And then that boy who said, I will, he went out to them and he was taken in his place. And it was on that basis, Imam Ibn Kathir, he mentions, that when that occurred, not even the disciples knew that he was taken instead of Isa. And he mentions that it is for that reason that even their scriptures have in it the mention of the fact that he was crucified, because even the disciples thought that he was taken. And so Allah Azza wa Jal mentions, وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ وَإِنَّ الَّذِينَ اخْتَلَفُوا فِيهِ لَفِي شَكٍّ مِّنْهُ. That verily Allah mentioned they didn't kill him, neither did they crucify him, but a resemblance was made. And verily those who dispute concerning him, they are in doubt about the affair. مَا لَهُمْ بِهِ مِنْ عِلْمٍ إِلَّا اتِّبَاعَ الظَّنِّ وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ يَقِينًا. That even the Romans likewise, they did not have certain knowledge concerning what had occurred, rather they followed conjecture. وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ يَقِينًا. But they did not kill him with certainty. Then Allah mentions, بَلْ رَفَعَهُ اللَّهُ إِلَيْهِ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ حَكِيمًا عَلِيمًا حَكِيمًا. Rather, Allah Azza wa Jal rose him to himself. And so Allah Azza wa Jal in the verse indicates that that it was not Isa who was killed or crucified, rather it was someone that took the resemblance of Isa ibn Maryam. In any case, that is our belief, but their belief is that Isa passed away and died. So when he was in the garden and he saw Mary Magdalene, he indicated to Mary, look, it is I, because Mary was afraid, because he was supposed to be dead. She said, look, it is I, it is me. And they argue and say, well, what about the verse then? How Jonah was for 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale, so shall the Son of Man be, referring to himself. How Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights, so shall I be. So they say that he's establishing the fact that he would pass away and be in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights, and then he would be resurrected. But actually, if you look at the verse, reflect upon what, if we're going to say it is authentic, reflect upon its meaning. How Jonah was for 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale. How was Jonah for 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale? Alive. So if we're going to use that verse, then actually the verse is a refutation against you. Because Jonah was alive for 3 days and 3 nights, and that is our belief concerning Isa ibn Maryam. That he was alive, that he went into hiding. And then Allah Azza wa Jal took him to himself and he was raised. And so the affair then of him being killed on Good Friday, it is not something that we accept or believe in. As far as Easter Sunday is concerned, then of course Easter Sunday is nothing but a pagan celebration. Prior to the period, we have a 40-day period known as Lent. Prior to this Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday, and then Easter Sunday, we have a 40-day period known as Lent. Some devout Christians fast, they say, during this period. It is actually 46 days if you remove Sunday, with the removal of Sundays, or if you count the Sundays that are removed. This 40-day period is one that they claim, or that they say is a period of fasting. Their fasting, of course, is that they don't eat large meals, so they'll drink tea. You can have a light snack, for example. But you'd leave any large meals. So tea and snacks you can still have. Or they say the fasting is just a period where one leaves certain bad habits. So if you smoke, for example, during Lent, then you would stop smoking for a 40-day period. Lent is preceded by a day known as Ash Wednesday, which was a day prior to the beginning of the fast, that they would take ash and they would mark their faces with a cross, and they would put ash on their faces, which was an indication of the fact that they were now under a state of fasting and difficulty, and so they would make that apparent to all of the people that they were fasting and put this ash on their faces. The ash that is placed on their faces, though, is something that in the Bible they have verses that speak against doing such affairs. That they have a scripture that mentions that when you fast, which is in the book of Matthew, the statement of Jesus apparently, when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do. You don't appear to be, going through difficulty and thirst and what have you. He said, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show men that they are fasting. I tell you the truth, that they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your heads and faces, and oil yourselves, anoint yourselves, so that it will not be obvious to men that you are fasting, but only your Father who is unseen. And so, in complete contradiction to the verse, they put ash on their faces when they begin their fast. The day before the Ash Wednesday, we have Shrove Tuesday, which is also known as Pancake Tuesday. Pancake Tuesday was actually a day of feast, because it was a day that they said was the prelude to the beginning of the fast the following day. And so they would get rid of, because it was not permissible for them to eat unleavened bread and what have you, so they would get rid of certain foods and they would feast on that day. And for that reason, we still have Pancake Tuesday, Shrove Tuesday, which again is something that we need to be careful of, because oftentimes as Muslims, we involve ourselves in such affairs. Shrove Tuesday, Pancake Tuesday, let's make pancakes, Pancake Tuesday. But what was Pancake Tuesday? What did it signify? It was an act of celebration, act of worship that was carried out by followers or by Christians, which again was not an affair that was established by the early church. In fact, Shrove Tuesday, Ash Wednesday, and Lent, none of those affairs are present in the Bible. None of them. Not the putting of the ash on their faces, not the feasting prior to the day of Lent, prior to the beginning of Lent, neither the 40-day period of Lent itself. None of them are present in the Bible. They were introduced and are traced back. Some of the Bible historians mention, traced back to somewhere, or Christian historians mention, traced back to somewhere in the region of 1,000 years or 1,000 years after Isa ibn Maryam. And so, again, Ikhwan, when we look at what we conclude, we look at what we see, we find then that if there's anything that we can do, is that as Muslims we can take lessons from these historical accounts. One of the lessons that we take, first and foremost, is the important station of guarding against innovation. The important station of guarding against innovation, because it is the allowance of innovation that has caused their religion to become the religion that it now is. Something completely alien to Isa ibn Maryam, alien to his disciples, alien to the early church, something that is not present in the Bible whatsoever. It is on the basis of them not guarding against the incorporation of innovation in the religion that has caused and allowed these pagan festivities now, which in their origin were festivities that revolved around the worship of pagan gods. Can you imagine, Ikhwan, that as Muslims we allowed festivities and we allowed periods of celebration that revolved around worshipping Vishnu and Brahma, and other than that from the various pagan deities and objects of worship. And so it is by way of being lax with the affair of innovation that these affairs have been incorporated into their religion, and the religion has become something completely different. So now they'll eat pork, now they'll drink wine, now debauchery, adultery, fornication, all of the things that were present in the Bible and have been prohibited, we now find that it is now permissible and fine for them to practice certain practices. And I won't mention, just out of political correctness, I won't mention the other things that have been incorporated and permitted by the church. And that, brothers and sisters, is something that we can learn a lesson from. Similarly, one of the things that we understand then is that we should not consider the one who has a strong stance against involving oneself in these festivities. We should not consider him to be harsh. And that is an unfortunate reality now, that when someone from the Muslims now says, well, no, we shouldn't celebrate Christmas, we shouldn't celebrate Easter, we shouldn't be involved in these festivities, people say, oh, ya akhi, subhanallah, just let the children enjoy themselves, ya akhi. It's just Christmas. Let, show off shoes there, just some pancakes. So these issues, ikhwan, if one is unaware of their origin, one is unaware of the fact that they not only they have been incorporated into Christianity, but they have their origins in paganism. If one is aware of that, brothers and sisters, then we will be acquainted with the fact that it is not something that we should take lightly. Rather, it is something that we should consider very seriously and understand that it is in no way, shape or form anything connected to Isa, and is in no way, shape or form something connected to the practice of any of the prophets and the messengers. Rather, it is alien to the religion that was sent down by Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah Azza wa Jal has blessed us, brothers and sisters, with a book that remains perfect, blessed us with the perfect sunnah that explains the Quran, and has blessed us with scholars and with ulama that continue to explain the book as our early scholars from among the Sahaba continued to explain it. Scholars and ulama and callers who defend our deen and protect it from accretions, from innovations, from anything creeping into it. And so on that basis we have the statement of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, يحمل هذا العلم من كل خلف عدول ينفون عنه تحريف الغالين وانتحال المبتلين وتأويل الجاهلين. That verily this religion will be carried in every generation by its trustworthy ones. And then listen to the characteristic that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned concerning it. They repel from it the distortions of those who go beyond bounds, and the fabrications of those who fabricate and lie, and the false interpretations of those who are ignorant. And that no doubt is an indication of the fact that the station of our scholars and the station of the students of knowledge is of major importance, for indeed it is they who are the vanguards of the religion, and they are those who, on the basis of their knowledge and on the basis of their understanding, repel from the religion that which other religions would have and have incorporated into their practice, and thus their religions have become something completely different. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to keep us upon that correct sunnah, to keep us upon the way of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for indeed it is nothing but an extension of the true religion that was propagated by every single one of the prophets and the messengers. Every single one of those who Allah Azza wa Jal sent, their religion, brothers and sisters, was one. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentioned al-anbiya ikhwatun li'allat dinuna wahid wa shara'i'u shatta. That verily the anbiya, the prophets, are ikhwatun li'allat. They are brothers, ikhwatun li'allat, referring to them being brothers having the same father but different mothers. That they were like unto brothers having the same father but different mothers. Then he explained, Dinuna wahid wa shara'i'u shatta. Our religion and our deen is one. All of the prophets and the messengers. Our deen is one, wa shara'i'u shatta. Though the sharia that each of us had may have differed. And so the deen of all of the prophets and the messengers, ikhwan, was one deen. The deen of all of the prophets and the messengers was one deen. And if anyone truly wishes to practice the religion of Isa ibn Maryam, of Jesus, the son of Mary, then it is by way of them practicing the deen of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that preserves everything that Isa ibn Maryam, Musa, Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, and all of the prophets and the messengers they were upon. And it is a blessing to be upon that religion, ikhwan, in these latter days. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى يوفقنا وإياكم لما يحبه ويرضاه وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خير. You mentioned the two Eid in relation or in regards to celebrating. What other celebrations among the Muslims do we have, i.e. the Mawlid? The Mawlid is not from the celebrations of the Muslims. The Mawlid al-Nabi, ikhwan, it should be understood, was something that was incorporated later in resemblance to the celebration of Christmas. Mawlid al-Nabi was never, ikhwan, the Prophet's birthday was never celebrated by any of the early Muslims. The Sahaba never celebrated it. Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali never celebrated the Prophet's birthday. The Messenger himself didn't celebrate it. And Allah Azza wa Jalla has commanded us to follow him. Similarly, ikhwan, if you look at those generations, the first three generations, none of them celebrated the Prophet's birthday. Not the Sahaba, not the Tabi'een, the successors of the Sahaba, not the Atba' Tabi'een, their successors, none of them. And even if the one who celebrates the Prophet's birthday wishes to argue and continues to argue and doesn't accept that the Prophet ﷺ didn't celebrate it, that the companions didn't celebrate it, that the Tabi'een didn't celebrate it, the Atba' Tabi'een didn't celebrate it, then let us ask them, did Abu Hanifa celebrate it? Not Abu Hanifa, not the A'immatul Arba'a, none of the four Imams, and none of the earlier generations. And so, ikhwan, since that is the case, that which was not deen then will never be deen now. As Imam Malik said, that which was not deen then will not be deen now. If it was not deen at the time of the Messenger of Allah and his companions and their successors, if it was not deen then it can never be deen now. And so we have those 2 days of celebration. As far as Eid al-Adha, then of course it has the 3 days of eating and drinking. And other than that, ikhwan, we have those other forms of celebration for particular occasions, like the walima, like the aqiqah, which is in many ways, or in some ways, a form of celebration. This is a time of eating and drinking and praising Allah Azza wa Jal for the birth of a new child. Now, if our non-Muslim family or neighbors purchase Easter eggs, Christmas presents, birthday presents, and so on, what do you advise us to do? Can we accept? And if not, then what is the best course of action to take? The best course of action is to use it as a means for da'wah. Use it as a means and as an opening for da'wah. That, politely, with wisdom, inform them of the fact that, I'm sorry, but I can't accept it because. And then use it as a platform for da'wah. That the Easter egg, it has an origin that, as of course in a concise way and in a clear way, but explain the fact that the origin of those practices are in paganism, they're religious practices. As Muslims, we are not, it is not permitted for us to involve ourselves in the religious practices of other religions, particularly that which has its origin in paganism. And use it as a platform for da'wah. Inshallah. Wallahu ta'ala alam. Jazakumullahu khairah. If there's no more questions, we'll round up on that note, inshallah. No problem.
What is I've been obviously looking into the life of the Prophet and trying to bring myself more onto deen as was interpreted by them.
No.
One of the questions I've got is about the beard. With the Sahih narrations about the beard, Bukhari and Muslim, where they said crop the moustache
and grow the beard. Yeah.
Grow the beard. So obviously we've been brought up under the Hanafi form locally, where they say you can take a
Well, actually, there is another narration outside of the affair of Hajj and Umrah, a narration of Ibn Umar, that Ibn Umar was from the companions who was known likewise to take after a fist. And some of the scholars, they mention, which is a principle in the science of hadith, that the person who narrates a hadith is best to understand the hadith. And Ibn Umar was the same companion that actually narrated the hadith about growing the beard, about leaving it to grow. And so that's number one. Number two, it was well known that Ibn Umar was very, very staunch in following the Sunnah, to the extent that other companions used to reproach him for some of the things that he did. Like he would urinate in a place but had no desire to urinate, and he only did so because the Messenger of Allah urinated in the same place. Or he, on an occasion, got up on his horse and began to laugh. And so he said, "Wallahi, I had no desire to laugh, except that I saw the Messenger of Allah on an occasion get on his horse and begin to laugh." So Ibn Umar was well known for his staunch and his rigid following of the Messenger of Allah, and he was the same narrator that mentioned and narrated the hadith about growing the beard. Yet he was the same narrator that took from the beard after a fistful, after the fist. So the scholars on that basis, those who hold the position, they argue that the likes of Ibn Umar would never have taken from the beard on the basis of a doubt or a conjecture or just some understanding. And so they return that back then to the manner in which that hadith is to be understood. And so it is one of those issues that there is something from a difference of opinion among the scholars. From the scholars are those who say, Mr. Sallam said, grow it, leave it. And then others who say, well, yes, grow it, leave it, but there are these narrations that indicate the permissibility of regulating its growth by trimming after the beard. The one who trims after the beard is still considered to have grown his beard. So it is one of those type issues.
Based on the if I stick to what I've done, which is a fist,
Yeah.
across the jawline.
That's right. No. And it's after the fist, not before the fist into that. No. Question: the original boy who became Isa, what happened to him afterwards? Allahu Ta'ala A'lam. If it is established, then what is apparent was that he was crucified in the place of Isa ibn Maryam. As far as what happened, was he taken? Because if the narrations are established that he took the place of Isa ibn Maryam, then the statement of Isa was, "Who will take my place?" and for him is Jannah. And so he would have been martyred. No. Wallahu ta'ala alam. I have a dars in Birmingham, Ikhwan, in a short while, so I'm going to have to shoot back. Jazakumullahu khairan. Again, apologies for our late beginning, and Allah reward you for your istima' wa jazakallah khair. Hayakumullah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.